for 10 Downing Street with me, Ishita Mitra.
And me, Shashank Matu.
The election fever is high in the United Kingdom. The country is gearing up to hold its general elections on the 4th of July.
And this happened after Prime Minister Rishi Sunak called early elections. Now, will this be a masterstroke or a misfire for Sunak?
Will Labour return to power after 14 years? You'll know soon enough.
But before that, we need to find out about two things. Number one, how the elections are conducted in the UK and who the major players are.
Let's have a look. The countdown has begun. As we speak, the lower house of the UK's parliament has been dissolved, and the country is set to hold its general elections next month. This means the current members of the parliament have lost their status and the government has entered a pre-election period. So in this period, ministerial activities along with departmental activities gets restricted. So anyone who wants to remain in the House of Commons is now campaigning for their re-election. Over 130 MPs have already declared that they will not stand in election this time. So what did the House of Commons look like before dissolution? Let's take a look. Conservatives had about 345 seats out of the total 650, while the opposition parties, independent candidates and Speaker collectively held a share of about 305 seats. The opposition party, Labour, had a share of about 205 seats out of total 305. Conservatives have been in power for the last 14 years, and in this span of time there have been 5 Prime Ministers: David Cameron, Theresa May, Boris Johnson, Liz Truss and Rishi Sunak. This time over 650 seats from the House of Commons are up for grabs, for which the country has been divided into 650 areas called constituencies. Each of these would elect one representative to the Westminster. In general elections, each adult has one vote, and since the UK follows first past the post system, voters choose one candidate on the ballot system, and the candidate who gets the most votes becomes the Member of Parliament for that area. Most candidates belong to political parties, or they can even run independently. Let's take a look at the larger picture. According to the UK's electoral system, the party that wins the majority of votes would assume power. So what is the magic number here? 326. However, if no party is able to secure a majority on its own and elections produce a hung parliament, then the incumbent Prime Minister, which is Rishi Sunak in this case, will be given the first chance to form the government. This could happen through either building a coalition or trying to govern with a minority government. However, if he fails to arrive at an arrangement, the incumbent then has to recommend the leader of the largest opposition party to form the government. Coalition governments are pretty rare in UK. The 2010 coalition between Conservatives and Liberal Democrats was the first one since 1945. And even in 2017, the Conservatives cut a deal with a smaller party to form a minority government. Polling will begin at 7 am local time and close around 10 pm on the 4th of July. The initial results will come out within hours and most will be declared overnight. So by the morning of 5th July, we'll have a clear picture of who is going to make it to the 10 Downing Street. Post that, the newly elected parliament will be summoned to meet on July 9th, which is when the new MPs will be sworn in and a new speaker will be elected. The formal state opening will happen on July 17th.
So, like India, the United Kingdom has a number of powerful political parties. But the two you really need to know about are the Conservatives and Labour. Now, these two political parties have dominated Britain for the last 100 years. So what we need to understand is who they are exactly and what they stand for. So let's start with the Conservatives, since they're the ruling party and they're also led by Prime Minister Rishi Sunak. Now, generally speaking, the Conservatives believe in a liberal and free economic policy and a limited role for government. They typically pride themselves on being responsible, stable, traditional, and they also generally like to avoid radical change. They're also considered to be really strong on defense and national security, and they want the UK to have a strong military capability. Now, the popular perception of the Conservatives is that they're dominated by elites as well as the rich. But they've also traditionally been seen as strong and efficient administrators, and you can trust the government to them. Now, the Conservatives have been in power since 2010, and they've already spent 14 years in government. They're facing an election on July 4th, where they will be challenged by the Labour Party. Now, Labour is generally seen as a progressive party. It stands for social justice, the rights of working class people, and unlike the Conservatives, it actually believes that the government should play a stronger role in the economy. So to use a familiar example for Indians, Labour is in favour of the government controlling entire segments of the economy, like energy or the railways. And unlike conservatives, they're generally seen as more idealistic on foreign policy and less willing to spend large amounts of money on things like defense. So that's essentially the difference between the two major parties. There's also a number of smaller parties like the Liberal Democrats and the Greens. But one name you'll be hearing a lot in this election is Nigel Farage, who heads the Reform Party. Now, Farage is a deeply controversial figure who has been seen by many as a British version of Donald Trump. Now, he was a major figure in the Brexit referendum, which saw the UK exit the European Union in 2016. Now, what are the big issues in this election? Perhaps the most important is the UK's economy. The country is suffering through massively low growth and is also performing a lot worse than other major developed countries. At the same time, there's this massive cost of living crisis, and basically things have gotten a lot more expensive in the UK over a very short period of time. There's been the COVID-19 pandemic and the war in Ukraine, and all of these things have played a big role in pushing prices up. And these prices increases, just like anywhere else in the world, have hit ordinary citizens the hardest. And many rate it as the key issue of this election. Another important crisis is that facing the UK's public services. I'm going to give you one example, the National Health Service, or the NHS. Now, for decades, the NHS has provided affordable and quality healthcare to British citizens. It's become so popular that it is a symbol of modern Britain. Unfortunately, the NHS is now crumbling. It's running out of money, its staff are striking for better pay, and it's increasingly unable to meet the needs of an aging population. And without the NHS, affording basic healthcare has become a problem for people, which is not a problem you generally see with developed and advanced countries. And finally, there's immigration. Now, migration over the last 10 years has added to the population of the UK by 2.2 million. Also, you have refugees coming in from Turkey, Iran, and Afghanistan who are crossing the English Channel in boats and landing up in the UK. Over the last 2 years, around 75,000 people have come into the UK this way just to seek asylum. And this influx of immigrants into the UK has been deeply unpopular, and many believe it will actually be a defining issue in this election.
So let's understand what Conservatives are promising to deliver in this election. They are determined to overturn the lead gained by Labour so far in the polls. Prime Minister Rishi Sunak has vowed to fight for every vote. They have set their agendas and policies in place, and they are set to release their manifesto next week. So what are they offering? First up, on economy, as these elections are happening at a time when UK has been grappling with the cost of living crisis. Rishi Sunak has been trying to make economic stability as a key plank of his election campaign. He's banking upon the recent fall in inflation and the fact that UK's economy has been growing faster than France, Germany and United States. He has promised to reduce taxes, keep inflation low, introduce support for low-income households and double the free childcare. In addition, their long-term ambition is to abolish national insurance, an unfair double tax burden on the workers. On the defence front, the Conservatives have vowed to raise defence spending to about 2.5% of GDP by 2030. They've also vowed to introduce national service for 18-year-olds. Now coming to migration. They have a very clear and a strong stance on this issue. Rishi Sunak has pledged to stop the boats and increase measures to deter immigrants and asylum seekers from heading towards UK. They aim to implement Rwanda plan and bring in measures like putting a cap on number of asylum seekers, raising the minimum salary limit for skilled workers and cutting visas for care staff and students. Another major issue is National Health Service. High waiting times have plagued the healthcare system. The waiting time for hospital treatment hit a record high of 7.8 million last year. Conservatives have promised to reduce this by introducing record funding. They point out that NHS budget has increased by 35% under their term. It has also pledged an extra £1 billion a year to NHS if it gets re-elected. Where will this funding come from? They say from cutting managerial roles in the NHS as well as by reducing the use of management consultants.
So what are the major parties planning to do about this? Now, Labour, which is the opposition party, has promised to restore economic stability, keep government spending under control, and also to keep taxes low. A big promise for them is to get Britain building again, which means investments in housing and modern infrastructure. It also wants to create a national wealth fund to spur investments in future technologies like clean energy. Overall, the idea is for Britain to become a clean energy superpower. Now, we talked earlier about how Labour is comfortable using government power in the economy. And one example of that is its plan to set up a government-owned Great British Energy Company to control electricity bills and invest in green power. Now, the thing for Labour is that they're trying to convince voters that they're stable and responsible in government and that they can manage this economic crisis well. This is important since the party is typically associated with radical economic plans that don't work out. Labour also wants a massive overhaul of the entire healthcare system to fix the failing NHS. That means hiring more workers, building more hospitals, and reducing waiting times for appointments. It also wants to combat the migration problem by creating a new border security command to help fix the boats crisis. It will also work more closely with European countries to control how many migrants are allowed to enter the UK every year. And finally, Labour is also trying to revise its reputation for being soft on defence, and it's trying to raise defence spending to around 2.5% of GDP. Since the Russian invasion of Ukraine, many European nations have raised their defence spending. And after years of cuts, Britain's armed forces have been severely weakened and they need modernisation desperately.
So joining me right now is Charlotte Littlewood. She is a political commentator from London and she is going to give us a glimpse of what's the mood like in UK with regards to the elections.
The last polls that we had came in today that showed that Labour was up at 44% and Conservative down to 23%. So it really isn't looking good for the Conservative Party, but we have known that for a while. And I think Rishi Sunak deciding to leave the D-Day commemorations early has not gone down well at all and has essentially sent a lot of the support that was still with Conservative over to Reform, which is being headed up by Nigel Farage. He's just declared himself as leader of the Reform Party, which has also given it somewhat of a boost too, at 13% actually today.
So, Charlotte, in terms of the big issues in this election, we hear that immigration has certainly been something that the Conservative Party has focused on. Rishi Sunak has focused his campaign very much on this idea of stopping the boats. Can you give us a sense of what this immigration issue is really about? What exactly is the debate in the UK about this right now?
So you have very different opinions on it across the political spectrum. So the Green Party and the Scottish National Party are very pro-immigration, and they put forward that immigration helps and boosts the economy. Whereas you'll see Conservatives and a light touch as well, Labour, talking about it purely through the terms of threat and the threat matrix. And what I find quite disingenuous is the attention on national security threats from those coming on the boats, whereas actually our domestic terrorism threat, for example, comes very much from our own British citizens who are becoming radicalised in the UK rather than those coming over on the boat. So there's a lot of disingenuous narratives around the boats and immigration that's being used to pull on people's emotions and get the votes, but it's really not working for the Conservative Party, and I don't think it has for a long time. You know, they've been talking about stopping the boats, and those that have wanted the boats stopped have not seen that manifest. And then those that see that this is a political narrative and quite disingenuous are therefore being put off from supporting the Conservative Party.
All right. So, speaking of issues that might affect the voting pattern, these elections are happening against the backdrop of two wars. You have Russia-Ukraine war and Israel-Hamas war. So, how do you think that is going to impact the elections and how people choose their leaders?
The war in Israel is absolutely taking the headline for swaying the way people are voting, also the rise of individuals. So we have individual independents running as well in the UK that are becoming more popular. We had George Galloway win in Rochdale, a very controversial political figure in the UK, purely on his support for a ceasefire. And there have been divisive political lobbying groups. One of them is Muslim Vote UK. It's set itself up to purely push who is and who is not supporting a ceasefire in the UK and directing that Muslims as a bloc vote in that direction. And this is very worrying. And a recent poll has shown that the next batch of voters, the 18 to 23-year-olds, are more likely to vote down religious lines. Like 34% of those of faith are going to be voting down religious lines. So it's quite concerning that we have a rise in sort of politicized religion coming into the ballot box, which is going to change the way in which people are voting, and it is going to change the results. And I think in quite a dramatic fashion, we're going to see something very different this July.
So Charlotte, a question that a lot of people in India have is about the Labour Party, which seems set to win the election. Now, just a couple of years ago, we had Jeremy Corbyn as head of the Labour Party. There were lots of questions about his advocacy for certain issues that in India were seen as very controversial. Kashmir was one among them. This idea sort of set into place that the Labour Party is not that friendly to India. Keir Starmer is now the leader of the Labour Party, and he's tried to create a much more moderate image for himself. He's given big speeches on India. How do you see that relationship between India and the UK moving forward if Labour is elected this time?
I think ultimately there will be a success in the relationship between UK and India. That is the destiny as India grows and becomes a stronger global economy, and the importance that the UK sees in that is without question. But Labour has a very troubled past, especially as you just said. The Jeremy Corbyn era was particularly difficult for the India-Labour relationship. It actually saw a 30% reduction in support from British Indians in the UK towards the Labour Party around the time when Jeremy Corbyn was talking about a right to self-determination for Kashmir. So there is a sense that Labour is not supportive of India, and that's not true now across the board. As you've just said, Keir Starmer has made a lot of positive speeches. Angela Rayner has come out to India, and so has David Lammy, who has come and met Jaishankar. And that's been very positive, and talking about picking up the trade discussions should they come into power, which it's looking like they will. But a good way to kind of look at the feeling around a Labour with regard to India is to look at our British Indians, especially our Hindus, who have, as I've said, dropped their support in the Jeremy Corbyn era, but even more recently, there was unrest in Leicester in 2022 between Hindus and Muslims that I'm sure you know well. And the Labour councillors absolutely took the wrong line, understood the situation very poorly, and took the side actually of the Islamist agitators. And this caused them to lose 17 seats in Leicester. Because of the lobbying of the British Hindus in Leicester against those Labour councillors at that time. So I think there's a troubled relationship that Labour will have to look at carefully. And one of its biggest challenges will be understanding India and understanding what the discussions are around Kashmir. Khalistan is another example. Labour has a troubling relationship with some pro-Khalistan groups in the UK that have committed themselves to breaking up India before its centenary. So these are the kind of things that Labour will have to grapple with and challenge to be able to build a very fruitful and positive relationship with India and the BJP in particular.
Thank you so much for watching this first episode of Race to Number 10 Downing Street. We will continue to bring you all the updates from this election in the United Kingdom. This has been India Today Global. I'm Shashank Mattu.
And I'm Ishita Mitra.
Thanks for watching.